This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Eberly Stock. Eberly Stock is one of my favorite backpacks. Now, I've been wearing their backpack for almost 20 years. They have lightweight backpacks. They have modular backpacks, everything from their main frame, which is just a frame pack that you can put bags on. They have these cool outside called bat wings that you can use. So check them out at eberlystock.com and make sure you tell them Ike sent you. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Hornady. They make some of the best, most accurate, dependable ammo on the planet. No matter if you're coyote hunting or plink and steel or hunting big game out west or even going to Africa, they make a bullet or an ammo just for you. Some of the most accurate and dependable ammo on the planet. Also, check out my podcast with Steve Hornady and learn about ammo as well as their story and some funny anecdotes from Steve. So welcome to Eastmans Journal Podcast edition. Today we're going to talk predators. And I have with me Dan Pickar, who is one of our staff members here, also writes a couple of the MRSs, and one of the only guys I know that killed a grizzly bear at under 15.
Yeah.
How old were you?
Yeah, 15. I just turned 15, 2002.
You went to the chicken coop to collect eggs and found a little surprise.
Yeah, there's a little more to it than that, but yeah, growing up in the country and up at the base of the Swan Range in the Flathead Valley, East Valley, and even back then, the grizzly bear population was exploding. And,
that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
22 to 23 years
and
ago.
they were killing bears and having problem bears down on the Flathead River, 10 miles from any mountain in the valley, grizzlies. So this particular group of bears, because it was a sow that had, I believe, 3 cubs, and she was teaching them to be naughty bears, to be bad bears. And she was just habituated, raiding chicken coops, farms.
I blame most of my bad habits on my parents.
Exactly. Yes. And of course, FWP hates these type of bears because they just cause problems.
It costs a lot of money.
And costs a lot of money removal, and they're taking them into the bob and trying to transplant them, 100 miles away. They show right back up. It's a food source. It's right. October, and they're getting ready to hibernate. But these bears, this group, they were kind of rolling through East Valley, and she kicked them out eventually. And so then these cubs were on their own. And this fall, it was bad. I mean, everybody was getting raided. Pets are missing, pigs. That was the big one, is that this sow and cubs, they killed a few pigs at this farm and south of us, and they relocated them, and they came back, and then they started messing with our stuff. And it wasn't, it was in the middle of the night. They're smart, right? I mean, grizzlies, you rarely would see them during the day, like around the property.
Least resistance.
Exactly. And they just don't like being seen. I mean, they're classic, very stealthy predator, and they're working under the cover of darkness, but they were going after the feed, right? I mean, it's October, getting ready for hibernation.
So they weren't after your chickens, they were after chicken feed.
Yeah.
The easy source.
Yeah, I mean, they could smell
chickens
that
are
grain.
Fluffy, but not a lot of meat to them.
Yeah, I mean, they would get them if, once we were storing our grain in this big shed. It was an old hog barn, actually, but it was like a legit house. And so they would tear into that, but they would also, if they couldn't get into the barn, which we fortified it, so it was pretty bear proof. They would, kill our chickens and ducks. And of course, growing up in the country, we, raise our own, garden and our own birds and whatnot. So it was a battle constantly with predators killing the chickens and ducks. And it was one night, I remember it like it was yesterday, Game 7 of the World Series. It was 10 o'clock. And
who was playing?
I think it was Boston, and it was somewhere out east where, those
Yankees.
games go, they go really late. In 2002, you'd have to look that one up. But the Yankees were on a roll during that time frame too. And our dog, she was a great guard dog, but she was on the porch, and hackles kind of went up, and she kind of bark under her breath and look up. The chicken coop, the area was about 75 yards up from the house through the trees, and she goes taking off up there, and I would run after her. I had this 20 gauge Remington 870 pump shotgun that was in the corner of the house there.
Loaded with SST or what?
with slugs. Yeah, we had slugs. And I mean, like I say, whether it's fox or skunks, we've shot everything over the years up there. And I followed her up there. By the time I got up there, she was already coming back my direction as I was yelling for her with the bear on her tail.
Wide-eyed. Oh, my.
Oh, yeah. High-tailing it. And, I just pulled up and shot twice as fast as I could, 15 yards as I came around the corner. And that bear was, spinning around, and I shot it once and then shot it again. And then my dad was yelling, "Are you all right?" He's yelling at me down there and from the house. And I took off down to the house. I had no idea what it was. Could have been a black bear for all we knew. But then the next morning we went and found it. And it was a grizzly, a 450-pound 3-year-old.
Ugh.
That's
a big old
bear.
3-year-old.
Yeah.
That's a big 3-year-old. Ugh.
So I said this on the podcast with Brian with Life of the Bow Hunters. I've been covered up with predators since the beginning of time.
That's why you're not scared of them. Yeah. You're cautiously aware.
Yeah, and that's
So I mean, I don't want to talk about. Obviously, that's a really cool story, and I appreciate you sharing it. But let's talk about predators and what they're doing on the landscape. Not just raiding chicken coops, but what they're doing to our ungulate population, which is really. It's come to light to me. I always knew it was a problem, but recently the sheer numbers of it have started to come out, and they've got enough studies now. I mean, the predators, apex predators on the landscape are significantly, significantly hurting our population of ungulates, and way more than hunters, because they're doing it every day. They're not just doing it in October or November.
Yeah.
So you just did, and this is what spurred this conversation. You just did a bunch of research in Montana, and what is happening to the landscape of Montana, and everybody's thinking, oh, it's more hunting pressure, and come to find out, it's really not.
Yeah, it's wild, and I see it as very unfortunate situations, and it's just the progression of society, but when predators are glorified as the most important animals out there. And I will say, and I know this because I've talked to a lot of them, but the opposition believes that we have to have predators on the landscape to fulfill the management needs, because they truly don't believe that you and me and other hunters belong on the landscape. And so when you hear these people talking about this, and they're pro-wolf and pro-bear and, pro-grizzly bear, I should say, and pro-everything else, but they truly believe that, well, we as humans need to leave it alone, and we don't belong there. And they're missing these large gaps of history that, and I tell them this, that man has been a part of nature since the beginning of time. And for whatever reason in their mind, they don't believe that. They want the hands-off approach.
Yeah, I recently been listening to a bunch of trapper journals, and there's a guy that does a podcast, and he's sewing a bunch of the trapper journals together so that it's a timeline on what was happening. Do you know how many Indians were on this landscape? And they were on this landscape for 2,000 years? There was 15,000 Sioux. 15,000.
Wow. Yeah.
And what, to think that there was no man here is insane. And they were dealing with predators, and they were, hunting buffalo, and they were affecting the landscape every single day. And that's just one tribe. And there was 22 tribes just in the Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas. That's a lot of people.
Tens of thousands.
That's a lot of people. And to think that we aren't part of this nature is insane. And it's insane. And guess what? We've built the infrastructure. We're here to stay. We're not going anywhere, right? Yeah. Drive down a highway. How expensive was that to build? How much resources would it take to build? And do you want to leave your nice little beautiful house in Bozeman, Montana? No.
Yeah. And so the beauty of what we have today, though, is the science and the studies and just everything to back it up, to back up what we're doing. The North American model for wildlife conservation. That's why we have the game animal populations that we have today, period. That's why we have our animals that we have. And when you and that includes management of all species. Not one species is necessarily more important than the other. And when you exclude some species, like the wolf for several years and the grizzly bear, which is still excluded for decades, it causes problems. And will one predator species, destroy an elk herd or destroy a deer herd? No, but it's a collective effort when they're not managed, and when you're dealing with, in these areas, grizzly bears, black bears, mountain lions, wolves, coyotes. That's 5 predators on populations, and once again, a lot of studies out there. And I mean, go to Yellowstone and how that has been transformed over the course of time by predators to where, a lot of areas don't have elk anymore. I mean, numbers are way down. So we have all these great examples to back up the science that we have today.
Right. So what are some of the numbers? Well, actually, to get back to that, you said one species can affect another drastically. That there's actually science. I did a podcast with Dr. Kevin Monteith, and he did his doctor's degree on the mule deer in the Sierra Nevadas, and come to find out, they were losing mule deer to the point where he was worried there weren't going to be deer left by the time he finished his study. They were losing them significantly. And he went everything from, was it habitat? Was it a disease? Was it winters? Was it, summer habitat, winter habitat? What was it? Guess what it was? Bears, black bears. And they were eating so many fawns in the spring, in that first 6 weeks of that fawn's life. They were eating 30 to 40 fawns, and there were so many bears because California quit killing bears, made it so difficult to hunt bears. They were quit killing them that they were going to wipe that mule deer herd out, completely wipe it out. So there's science that shows that they can significantly affect it. You and I were just talking about there's a study in Colorado. Was it Colorado? Mm-hmm. What was that all about?
On the mountain lions?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a 30-year wildlife biologist on the Eastern Front there did a study on mountain lions, and there's around 4,000 lions in the state. But this is a specific scenario where mountain lions were the primary predator in this area, I believe by Fort Collins, somewhere in that area. And he did a study on the effects of, just how many mountain lions are killing mule deer and how many fawns are being killed by lions and adults. And he broke it all down and studied this over several years. But it was somewhere that in the number of 80 to 90 deer are being killed by one mountain lion every year. And so you add that up, 200,000 deer a year by mountain lions. And that's like in the perfect scenario, the perfect storm, probably like in the Sierra Nevadas too, where you have this high population of bears and a pretty good or a decent, deer population. So it's exacerbated a little bit because of that. But that's a huge number. So here's an interesting thought, because everybody, their argument, the other side's argument is, well, if we have the predators and we leave it alone, the predators' population will decrease with the ungulates population decrease. So I asked Dr. Monteith, I said, what is that lag? Is it overnight? Is it, 2 years, 3 years? He said 6 to 8. So if you have a decrease, like we were talking about the Wyoming herd, the Wyoming mountains, the Wyoming ranges mule deer herd, we were talking about that. We had a really bad winter, 22, 23. I said, so does that mean the coyotes are going to fall off? He said, no, it'll take 6 to 8 years before the coyote population falls off because of that decline. Well, those deer, they're halfway back or a third of the way back to their carrying capacity. So those coyotes may never drop off, other than if there's disease, if they get disease. Yeah.
So to your argument, those mountain lions or those bears in the Sierra Nevadas or the mountain lions in Colorado, that population may never decrease. And here's a scary thing he said. The more you kill them, this is scary. For instance, let's take coyotes, for instance. The more you kill them, the more they breed. because they have the ability to increase and decrease their litter size based on the habitat, their habitat, meaning their food sources, they can increase and decrease their litter size. Bears can do the same thing with twins, triplets. Now we're seeing grizzly bears with 4. Before the last 5 years, they never documented a grizzly bear having 4 quadruplets, four cubs. Now they're all over the place. Hell, was it 299 or 399, whatever the 99 was? She had 4, and she was old.
Yeah.
So they're able to expand and contract their litters, meaning that they fill a void. If the habitat's there, meaning if the ungulates are at their carrying capacity, no matter how many you kill, they're gonna fill that void. Only thing we can do, and we'll talk about this. Let's talk about this. Is save those fawns or those calves, or those kids, or if it's sheep, the little guys, save them in the first 6 weeks of their life. Give them a 6-week jump start.
Yeah. Tons of studies out there, Alaska, Utah, but they go through and that's what they study is fawn or calf mortality. And once again, black bear seems to be the highlighted predator because they kill the most.
And they're everywhere. And Alaska has great studies out there. They'll say that in the first 6 weeks of their life, a black bear will kill 30 to 40% of a calf crop in Alaska, in these areas where black bear densities are higher. And that's just one predator. And then you factor in grizzly bears. They do it just as effectively. And then you factor in wolves. Now, wolves, while they will still hunt down calves and fawns and find them and kill them, they're more effective, running down a herd or and killing adults with pack size. Right? They're a pack animal. That's where they really thrive, is hunting in packs, whereas bears are solitary hunters. So it's a different style of predation on the animal, on the ungulate. So I asked Kevin, Dr. Marti, that. I said, so what's the difference between bears and coyotes, or bears and wolves? And he said wolves and coyotes hunt pack, and they are more likely, because of the way they hunt, they're opportunistic. So they'll take they'll kill the weak, the old. They'll take advantage of crusted snow. They're more like that. Whereas a bear is a lot more detrimental, because they'll kill as many calves as they can, pat them up, and they'll come back later. So it's not kill one, fill your stomach, go lay in the trees like a wolf will. They kill one, pat it up, go kill another one, pat it up, because they're opportunistic in a different way. Mm-hmm. They're trying to kill as much as possible to get as much food. Patting up means they bury them, and the reason they bury them is because then they have maggots and all kinds of other nasty things that grow inside them, and they eat that too. So it's just calories is all it is.
Yeah,
which
saving them for later.
Ugh. If you've ever seen one of those pads, they're nasty.
Definitely.
So what do you think? So you were talking about 200 some thousand deer, which just, I can't believe there's that many deer there. I mean, that's just, the numbers seem off to me.
Yeah.
But hey, numbers are numbers, right? So what do you think the game agencies can do to help alleviate some of this predator and allow them to manage the ungulates more accurately?
Well, I think with all the states, all the western states in Alaska, we have a wide array of predator management tactics, from California, which is a hands-off approach, and Oregon and Washington wanting to be a hands-off approach. That happens when the Humane Society infiltrates the game and fish departments because they want their predators. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, which I'm so thankful for, the state of Alaska not being afraid to go after the problem. And what does Alaska do? If they have an area that has very poor moose calf recruitment, they go after the black bears. And just not only the black bears, they go after whatever is the predominant predator there. And
be it wolves, grizzly bears, black bears.
And you find articles. Go do some Googling, and they don't, it's not published very widespread because they don't want the spotlight on it, I don't think necessarily either, but they'll go and helicopter kill 90 grizzly bears. 112 wolves, like in these areas that have, like the caribou herd was really struggling. And so they went in there. What is the number one thing that we can do to help a struggling herd? And, we can't really control winter, right? But guess what?
Habitat's hard.
Habitat's tough. There's many variables that you have to deal with there. But what we can do, we can kill predators. We can identify main predators and causes of predation. The studies back it up and go after the predators and really accelerate a rebound of the ungulate, whether it's deer, elk, moose, whatever.
So are there numbers that prove that?
Yeah, absolutely. So up there on those specific studies, and Utah did a great study too, but they went from, in these high predator density areas, they went from fawn or calf recruitment in the 20s. In some of these areas that were struggling, low 20s and even into the teens, there's just so many predators, and that's a dying herd when you're not at least in the 25 to 30, fawns. Yeah.
That's Kevin told me that 25 to 30 is where you just maintain your size.
Maintaining.
If you want to grow, you've got to significantly increase that.
Yeah. And so some of these areas, I think actually some of them, there's just so many studies down in the single digits of fawn recruitment. But aerial harvest, aerial gunning, removing predators, next year, 68% caribou calf recruitment. So the numbers don't lie. Like, it works, it's effective, and it can be a way to essentially fast track your way into recovery of a species or a herd in a specific area. And you're going to thin out the numbers, obviously, when you're aerial killing. But this is, with predators, you're not going to make a predator population go extinct by these methods unless you're using poison.
Yeah, everybody, because everybody looks back to what happened in the 30s and 40s, right before World War II, and there wasn't a wolf on the landscape, and a coyote was rare because they had sheep and cattle everywhere, and they were poisoning everything. They were poisoning birds of prey. They were poisoning every predator on the planet, trying to keep the war machine rolling with wool, mostly. There's a lot of blankets that went across.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. So, and like Kevin told me, they'll just have more instead of, if the ungulate population is at carrying capacity, the predators will just have more. They'll have 6 pups, 8 pups. They'll have quadruplets. They'll have enough bears to fill that void. But by killing them off, you're just giving that ungulate population a head start in that first 6 to 8 weeks of their lives.
Yep. And I think that's a good example. So when you're saying, they'll have more pups, I see that as a direct reflection of good conditions for that female predator, right? She had a good winter, food source is high, right? She's living right, living smart, in really good physical shape. So natural selection, right? You're going to have more pups or more kits,
Cubs
whatever it is. That's what Kevin was explaining, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in southern Colorado where we hunt elk. We used to hunt antelope there, and the antelope population is just diving. And we'd see more and more coyotes. I mean, we get to the point where you'd see 15 coyotes in a day, that's a lot. Used to be, you see out in that place, you see 1 or 2. You take a pop shot at it, and that never. But 15 in a day, and the landowner got really aggressive about 5 years ago and let people come out and trap, and he was having coyote contests, and I mean they were killing a pile of coyotes, and it seemed like the more they killed, the more coyotes there were. Well, that goes back to they had carrying capacity. The coyotes had a carrying capacity that they were trying to meet, and the more they killed, the more they had. Which then the more they had, the more ungulates they ate. Which then it's actually an inverse reaction to the dying freaking poor damn fawns. And so what they did now, and this is what our game agencies are doing, and we'll talk about this study that one of my buddies did here in northern Wyoming. What they're doing now is they're going in and aerial gunning these coyotes and stressing the coyotes out when they're right before they're having pups, and when the ungulates are dropping their fawns, when those antelope are dropping their fawns, and knowing that they're not affecting the population. What they're doing is stressing those coyotes out so that it gives the ungulates, just gives them a head start.
Yeah. Gives
those fawns 6 weeks of growth to where then they're out of that, they're out of the danger so much, because coyotes are, they're not big enough to take down an adult without there being something like a broken leg or something.
Yeah. So extremely susceptible those fawns are, right? Those first 4 weeks, 6 weeks of their life before they can actually outrun a coyote. And it's amazing when you look at studies as well about coyotes, like how effective they are. And there's studies all over this country about coyote predation on deer fawns, and it's extreme as well. Utah did a great study in a unit, and what they did is they had a northern section, a southern section, and then they had an area in the middle that was kind of a buffer of a mule deer herd. And whereas this is not like it's not a perfect study, but we do enough of these studies that aren't, that you can actually build a great idea. So what happened, and what I mean by that is habitats vary, right, when you have study areas, but they did a good job with it. So one year they aerial gunned the north side for coyotes and just were really hard on the coyotes. And they didn't touch the southern side. They didn't do any aerial gunning. And then they measured fawn recruitment that year.
Which fawn recruitment means the number or the percentage of fawns that were born versus the percentage of fawns that get to October, right?
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes their first year of life,
okay,
they'll measure that. And in some studies, it's the first 6 weeks. And so, yeah, you have to. But I think generally they're saying the first year of life for them. And so where they aerial gunned the coyotes, they were up there in the upper 60% for fawn recruitment. And then in the area that they didn't do any predator management, they were in the low 20s. And then what they did is they switched 2 years later and they aerial gunned the south side and didn't do it on the north side. And it showed the same thing. And so that's just with one predator species going after a herd. So you factor in all these other predators and we can see why we have, these localized areas that are declining in deer, elk, moose, sheep, and goat, which that's a whole nother discussion. Mm-hmm. But yeah, coyotes, talk about a very, extreme presence on fawn recruitment in some of these areas.
Well, so I have a buddy that here in northern Wyoming that him and some guys got together. And they tried to get. They have a Wyoming. Here's a shameless plug for them. The Wyoming Sportsman's Foundation, and it's a local group of guys. And they have a banquet coming up here, and they have commissioner tags. They have a couple of the elk commissioners tags. But what they did is they took a bunch of that money that they raised, and they were going to give it to the Game and Fish to control coyotes on the fawn grounds when they're fawning. Game and Fish didn't want to do it, and so they did it on their own. And they paid the contractors, which the Federal Fish and Wildlife have federal trappers, they're subcontractors. Paid their time, and they went in for 3 years, and they just put the smackdown on these coyotes for 3 years, and they were in the low 20s fawn recruitment. And after that 3 years, they were in the high 70s. And then they shut it off for 3 or 4 years, and now they're planning on doing it again, just to grow this deer herd, because they know, obviously the proof's in the pudding, right? Well, there were some biologists that said, no, it's not the fawn. We got 70%, but it wasn't just coyotes. It was habitat, blah blah blah. And so he's really smart. He goes, okay, if that's true, the next river drainage over has the same exact habitat. What was your fawn recruitment? In the 20s. Oh, so it was habitat then. No, it's not habitat. It was freaking coyotes, because the exact same habitat in 2 different river drainages, exact same winters, exact same habitat, and the fawn recruitment is a 50% difference. 50 points different. That's a problem. Today's sponsor is Forever Barnwood. Guys, we have been using this in our renovation of our building here in Powell, Wyoming, and I am here to tell you it is amazing. They are a premier supplier of barnwood across the U.S. Their products come from fresh-cut Wisconsin white pine, which has been kiln-dried way below standard lumber and hand-processed into various products like barn doors, beams, flooring, and wall covering. This type of lumber product provides all of the advantage of reclaimed barnwood at a fraction of the cost, not to mention how easy it is to work with because it's straight lumber and it doesn't have all the waste. Their barnwood products are a renewable resource and come in a variety of widths and lengths, large sizes for countertops, beams, posts, stairs, and railing systems, as well as wall covering and everything else. Their prices are only a fraction of the cost elsewhere, and they can ship anywhere you need it. With their innovative barnwood products, you'll have the right piece at the right time for your special project. So check them out at yourforeverbarnwood.com. No matter what your project is, Forever has. With their innovative barnwood products, you'll have the right piece at the right time for your special project. So check them out at foreverbarnwood.com, and no matter what your project is, Forever Barnwood has you covered. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Silencer Central. Silencer Central, thank you for supporting us. If you would like to support Silencer Central, if you have any interest in a silencer, which I encourage because it is a game changer in the field, check out silencercentral.com. They will walk you through the paperwork online, as well as they can ship that silencer directly to your doorstep. So check them out and tell them Ike sent you.
Not that I want to bash game and fish agencies, but it's a cop-out on the habitat cop-out. And where it can be in some areas like habitat issues or drought conditions, yeah, it can be. But habitat is easy to blame, right? Because
it's uncontrollable.
Yeah, and you don't have to put any funds to it, and you don't have to spend any time on it. And when it comes to, predators, it puts everything in the limelight, in the spotlight, if you're going after predators.
Well, they have now changed their tune with different leadership there, and now that Wyoming range, which was down to 4,000 deer last year, so the good winter, we have one winter between now and the bad winter last spring, they did that. They took $200,000 and they dumped it into controlling those coyotes when those fawns were, and guess what? We're 11,000 deer, and they're going to do it again this year because they know the best way to grow a herd is to get those fawns to be a year old.
And it's something that we can control.
Yeah.
As managers, as good stewards of the landscape, we can control predators. And we can't control the weather. We can't control the rainfall. We can't control the winter conditions. And so that's what it's so exciting to me, is that we're seeing this now, and we're seeing these game and fish agencies not afraid to go and manage predators.
Yeah.
Because the proof is in the pudding. It's proven. And I hope that some of these other states follow suit, and Montana being one of them. And it's hard, right, when you have the grizzly bear in these areas, that they're so overpopulated in these localized areas that I said earlier that one species can't have a drastic effect on a species. They can, but it's not going to make them go extinct. But there's always exceptions. There's always exceptions. And then you factor in wolves and black bears and coyotes, and we know how harsh they are on
cats.
Fawns. Yeah, cats. And it's just wow. I hope it really opens people's eyes, how extreme the pressure is on these ungulates with these predator meccas.
The other thing I want to talk about, okay, so we talked about what's happening and what we can do, and we talked about some of the hurdles and some of the roadblocks, which is game agencies, etc. What as us hunters can we do? I mean, obviously get out there and kill coyotes, get out there, kill black bear, even if you don't like hunting black bear, go take one, fill those quotas, make sure the lion's quotas are being met. What can we do to influence our game agencies? Is it possible?
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important, I feel like, to get involved. And there's a lot of naysayers out there that these game and fish agencies, they have their public comment period, but they really don't care and they don't listen. They just do it because they're required to. And I hope that's not true, and I think there's other states too. And I feel like Wyoming is pretty good with this, and just maybe localized for us because I've been involved, but get involved with your local area. And maybe if you live in the Midwest or back east, you can still comment on the websites of these game and fish agencies, but get involved locally and talk about these things and bring them up. And Scott Reeker's, coworker, he was saying, he talked to a commissioner and he's saying, all it takes is about 6 people to comment on a specific issue and it'll be looked at hard and probably changed if there's not any like major management or funding hurdles that go along with that. Like they'll listen. And I've seen that too. I would say like working, with some of the local guys, the wardens and the biologists and bringing things up and like, by golly, they changed it in the regulations.
Well, yeah, he was telling Scott that, and I don't remember what issue it was. It doesn't matter. There was only like 450 people that showed up across the state to the public comment. That's not very many people considering, it's less than 0.1% of the population in the state that are, so it doesn't take a lot. You and your buddies get out there and make the same comment. Those game agencies, they're going to start paying attention because they're either elected or they're in our case, they're appointed by the governor who is elected, and that pressure can be put on them. Yeah. And, I'm not saying that we have the best ideas because we don't. Maybe we don't know the science, and maybe there is better science out there. But if you're at the public comment and listening to the science, and maybe you have an idea that they haven't thought of, or maybe you have a willingness to help, go do some wildlife friendly fencing or whatever it is. But yeah, it doesn't take much.
Yeah, rally the troops. And I think, the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management, that group and the whole, Colorado thing that happened last year trying to outlaw cat hunting, that shows that we can rally the troops. Our side, the proponents of conservation, can rally and be the major voice.
Right.
And I think that's powerful, and that set a good precedent. And hopefully it lit a fire under everybody. I know it did me too, with getting out there and being proactive locally and then taking it further and hunting predators. Go spend the time. And Brian and I talked about this on Life of the Bowhunter podcast the other day, is, that's largely, hunting black bears in the spring. There's all these benefits. It's a beautiful time of year to be out. You're honing your Western hunting skills for the fall time, and you have the ability to go on a hunt where you can, it's relatively cheap to get a bear tag and come out west and go hunt a spring black bear, and you're helping the fawns and calves.
Right.
And so that's what I would say is, if you want a direct hands-on approach, go hunting.
Yeah.
Go hunt predators.
Well, it's not a coincidence that the spring bear hunts the same time as those fawns are dumping. Mm-hmm. It's all on purpose. Now, like Wyoming shuts it off about the middle of that, just so you're not out there screwing with them too, but that pressure. But that's not a coincidence. Kill them before those fawns start dropping. And it's a great time of year. And, you guys do a really good job on Life of the Bowhunter. If you haven't seen or listened to that, search it up, because you guys do a really good job on everything bow hunting, not just gear, which you do. You did a really cool thing the other day on sights, and I learned a bunch off that. That technology's changed a ton in the last 5 years. But you guys also, conditioning and shape. What do you do in the winter? Some of these, spring hunts, you're going to New Zealand in a couple weeks. That type of stuff, that if you're a bow hunter, pay attention to that podcast, because you guys do a really good job. Sure. But the other cool thing about spring bear hunting, and I think, is that it's a great time to get your gear out, test it, and so that and you have time to replace stuff, to add to it, to buy a new sight, because the technology's changed, and get in the field and play with it before you're standing 80 yards from a screaming bull elk and screw it up because the sight's not right. Absolutely. And ruin that once in a lifetime opportunity.
That's ultimately why I started doing all these years ago, is because that thought of, okay, someday I'm face to face and I am in a position with a giant bull or buck, whatever it is. I don't want to screw it up. Mm-hmm. And so, think of it as you're investing in yourself by going on these off-season hunts. Invest in the lifestyle, invest on your gear and knowing your gear. It's all investing in yourself. And in my opinion, it's the best way to spend money is when you're investing in yourself and what you love to do. And so anytime you're doing that, I'm a proponent of it.
So you and Jack went to Alaska on a black bear hunt last year, which that's on Beyond the Grid. Is it? It's about to release, right?
Yeah, middle of April it'll be released.
Okay, which is a really cool adventure. Let's talk about that. What spurred this, and what did you see up there?
Yeah, so this was an area. Once again, here we go. This is an area in central Alaska that they had a couple pretty harsh winters. And there's a lot of predators, brown bears, black bears, and wolves in this area. And just the moose population was just suffering drastically. And the winters, man, it makes it that much more difficult. So what did they do is they kind of opened up the predator hunting, the bear seasons, and they went, did it progressively. Ooh, I hate even saying that word.
Oh,
hey, it's a burner. But we're
going to have to bleep that.
Yeah, that's like a swear word for us common folk. But they went from, 2 to 3 to 4 bear limits, and then to a 5 bear limit these few years later.
5 bears?
A person, yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, and so
you can do 5 bears on one trip?
Yep. Yeah, so that's what we did. I didn't buy 5 bear tags. Jack did. He bought 5.
Did you kill all 5 of them?
Oh yeah, in 2 days.
Oh my gosh!
You'll never see anything like it. I've never seen anything like it. The black bear in Alaska is like the mouse in the lower 48. That's how prolific they are.
They're like monkeys.
They're
My dad calls them North American monkey.
Yeah,
because they're everywhere.
Yeah, they're everywhere. And just the densities and that's just the black bear, and then you have brown bears in there too.
Can you hunt grizzly bears in there? Mm-hmm. And brown bears?
Yeah.
Holy cow! You could do the trifecta of bear hunting.
I don't think in the unit that we were, they were like technically a grizzly, because you have to be.
Yeah, I think it's a parallel or so far from the coast.
Away from the coast,
Yeah.
And we were like kind of in the mid area. I mean, I think we were still about 5 to 10 miles from the coast, so we were inland a little bit.
Technically, you're brown bear hunting.
Yeah, and the brown bears were more down in the flats in the plains, the flood plains.
Yeah,
and where we were hunting black bears, and we talked a little bit about this on the other podcast, Life of the Bow Hunter. But this area that we're hunting, they're baiting. But this area it's all these rolly hills with Devil's Club and alder. And it's like, I don't know how you would successfully manage a bear population in country like that. Like, you have to bait.
Aerial gun them.
Yeah, if you could find, which you probably could, before in the first thing in the spring, before the leaves are really, growing.
There's still snow on the ground. You can see a black bear running across a snowfield.
Yeah, you could kill them. Yeah, so you could, but it's just a great, once again, Alaska Game and Fish being proactive about getting hunters involved and making a lot of money, $500 a pop for a bear tag up there for a non-resident, making a lot of money. And that's a beautiful thing about hunting, is involving hunters and building that revenue for the state game agencies. Whereas if they're just going out there and aerial gunning, it's a lot of money to do that.
Well, you were talking about, how many grizzly bears did they kill? I was sitting here going, that's $5,000 a piece. Boom, 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 boom. What a waste. Let the hunters do it.
Yeah, in some of these areas that are like, very hard to access, and maybe it's a rugged country, it's hard for people to get in there anyway, they go and do that.
Right.
And these areas, where hunters can get in there, I mean, yeah, it's a renewable resource. There's all these beautiful things about hunting, right? And that's just one byproduct of it, is involving hunters for the management purposes of a predator population.
Generating revenue so you can manage the predators. I mean, it's like this beautiful circle of life.
It is.
Or death.
Yeah. But what's beautiful about it is the North American model for wildlife conservation. I mean, it's by far proven worldwide, and we're the most game rich country in the world. And there's some other localized spots, thinking about New Zealand and feral animals and no predators. But for what we have, the diversity of wildlife that we have is pretty amazing. And the richness, the amounts of all these animals that we have is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and those that don't understand the North American, we call it the North American model of wildlife conservation, which was actually coined by Shane Mahoney, but it was invented, or it was started by, Teddy Roosevelt and that group, who were recognized that the meat market, that's what they were doing with the buffalo, and they were, killing every wild game animal on the planet and selling it at the market to feed, the U.S. And they had absolutely annihilated species, aka the plains buffalo, one of them. And so they decided, or they came up with this model on how to, number one, make the meat market illegal in North America, which it is. It's not in other countries, and they've done it successfully, but somebody had to manage it. And other things, but one of them is control populations via hunting and ethical hunting. And, Boone and Crockett has done a really good job at their conservation statements, and, check them out, because they're not just a record book. They're a lot more than that. And they're the ones that started it. Yeah. They're the ones that started this whole thing. And it was really about management of our wildlife to ensure that there was wildlife for grandkids for 100 years, 200 years down the road.
The forethought of our founding fathers and like Teddy Rose is pretty amazing. Like, really, got to be thankful for those guys.
Yeah.
To have that forethought to be like, okay. And once again, science, numbers, and as times become more modern, I guess, whether it's 1800s or 2025, it's still modern times, but we've proceeded. I'm not going to say progress, but we've.
You did it.
Yeah.
Another beep.
Right.
Luke, the producer's going to go, nah, another beep.
Beep. Swear words. But
I heard Dan swear once.
But no, it's just, how far we've come. And Teddy being able to see that and being like, okay, we do need to protect our wildlife. We don't need to necessarily shoot them all, down to nothing. And so it's pretty cool with how things have evolved over the course of time, and that's because we have what we have today because of Teddy Roosevelt.
And it's not just the animals. It's just not just the species that we hunt. It's everything. I mean,
yes,
it's prairie dogs. It's or not prairie dogs. I was thinking of prairie dogs. It's black-footed ferrets, which rely on prairie dogs. Why I said that. Black-footed ferrets to the raptors that we enjoy. You name it. We're even protecting animals that aren't native here, aka the pheasant. And if you don't know about that, go look on our Wingman channel. We did a documentary on the pheasant and how it is not native to North America, and where it came from and why it came here and what they are and how well they're doing. But it's all types of species, even the grizzly bear. We can't hunt it, but we spend a lot of money. In Wyoming, we spend a lot of tag sales dollars to manage that species that we're not hunting.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that there's states like Wyoming, there's a couple others, that our game and fish is 100% funded by the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is a tax on all weapons and ammunition and all that stuff, and by our tag sales. That's the only funds they get. They don't get anything from the general population tax base. And so we're, the hunters and the shooters, are funding this management. And like I said, it's a perfect circle in North American conservation.
It is. And one note too, did we set a record this year in Wyoming for grizzly bears taken?
Yep.
Problem bears, but just issues. Was it over 90?
90.
It was 90.
90. And here's the problem. If we were able to hunt those bears and those tags, we had it. I mean, it went to the 9th hour. It was the day before it was supposed to open. There was people that had tags issued, hunts booked. I mean, it was going to happen. And those tags were $5,000. So multiply that out, $5,000 by 90 freaking bears. And those problem bears would be the bears that those guys hunted.
Yep.
Because they're the ones that are, most interactive with humans. And so they're going to be the first ones taken. And if it's managed, that's a revenue source rather than a revenue suck.
Exactly. I think a good example of that too is like, well, maybe they do have it figured out over there, but in Africa, and really well about this, but you hear about this all the time. Oh, we got a problem elephant and so there's an opportunity to go hunt an elephant, maybe for a reduced price.
Yep.
are you interested? And that happens all the time over there.
Yeah.
So think about what that could, if you created like a list, and that's what the draw was, like here out west. Then so you have a list of hunters, and then when a game and fish agency, has this bear that's causing issues for whatever reason, they call the person on the list, pay your $5,000, and you go shoot a problem bear.
Yep.
And generate all this revenue for the state.
Well, and how they do it in Africa, and they could do that here, is the outfitters in that area, right? The Game and Fish knows, if it's Martolio or whoever in that area. Martolio's probably would have a list of guys that would write the check and be here tomorrow to shoot a grizzly bear. There's a hell of a list, and they all sit at the Sheep Foundation or the Hunt Expo at those banquets, and they'd be here tomorrow to shoot a grizzly bear. So the state gets revenue, Martolio gets revenue, the hunter gets to hunt something unique, and to end the common folk of us, we don't have a problem bear digging on our trash can, eating our chicken feed.
Yeah.
Right?
Everybody wins. It's a renewable resource. Let's throw that in there too. Yes. Wildlife is a renewable resource. There's absolutely no downside to that model that you just highlighted.
Yeah, there's no downside. And you know what? I may never be able to afford the whatever it costs to go shoot a grizzly bear, but at least guys are, and the resource is being funded, and the problem bears are being taken out, so that there's no. And you kill 90 problem bears a year, and if that's $5,000 or $10,000, whatever it is, and then all of a sudden the problem bears start decreasing, and then you slow the management down on it. I don't understand the downside to this.
Yep, there's not one. And unfortunately, and I hear this too, from guys, is that like, oh, we got to keep politics out of hunting.
The whole thing is politics,
right?
Who do you think sets the mandates?
It's impossible. So I don't know. It's a pipe dream that when guys say that, but hunting and management is politics. That's what it is. And so
we say that like politics is evil.
Yeah.
Politics in itself is not evil. Politicians can be evil that are in politics, but politics itself, especially in North America, in the U.S., we have a say. That's a beautiful thing. That's called politics.
Yep.
You have a say. I have a say. This podcast has a say. That's politics, and that's what makes this country great. And I tell my kids this all the time. Americans think weird. You go to Africa, you go to South America, you go to Asia, you go to Europe, they think completely different than we do. Completely different. So much so that they look at us as weirdos. Mm-hmm. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but we look and think differently because we have a say. They don't have a say. They don't have a clue.
Yeah. Even
in Canada, those poor buggers, the 51st state, they don't have a say.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and John about predators, and I think there's a lot of issues out there. The number one thing that people can do is get out, talk to your politicians, and talk to your game agencies, and get involved in local organizations like Wyoming Sportsmen's or Muley Fanatics or Mueller Foundation or Elk Foundation. All these groups have a say at the table, and if you're part of that, you get a say, and that's what's important. That's
Absolutely.
What makes this country great.
It does. Yeah, get it. Donate too. Like I've said this before. Anytime that there's active predator management going on, donate money. Mm-hmm. Donate money to the cause, because you're doing proactive good things that are helping what we have as a whole.
Yep, that's really cool. Well, check you out on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
What is it? Gutshot Pickar?
Yeah. That's a whole nother page. Yeah, different page. Yeah, Dan Pickar, and of course, Beyond the Grid TV. We have our page there, and check out Eastmans Hunting Journal's YouTube channel. That's where all the Beyond the Grids drop. This black bear hunt that we've talked about in Alaska, that's going to be up there as well.
Your New Zealand will be there. You have a New Zealand that dropped this year, and you're going back again.
Yep, we're going to do another video for that, and that's all on the page there. And if you want to keep track of us a little bit closer, social media.
Yep. And then Life of the Bow Hunter, make sure you check that out if you have any interest in shooting things with a sharp stick.
Yeah, bow hunting podcast, me and Brian Barney. Great podcast, a lot of fun. And we're definitely in the bow hunting, trifecta of hunting, but that's...
So if you're an opportunistic like me and I hunt bow when the archery season and rifle during, can I still listen to it, or am I excluded?
No.
Well, am I going to get bored listening to what slider sites of how they've ruined the the entire bow industry?
Yeah, we go down rabbit holes. We do, but not too bad.
Well, you guys have such a different. I love your podcast because you guys both come at it differently. Brian is a mule deer nut. Loves hunting mule deer. He dropped there's going to be a Beyond the Grid where he hunts in Colorado, which is unbelievable. I watched it for the first time the other day. Unbelievable hunt. I mean, those guys beat their head against the wall for 10 days trying to get a mule deer dead. But he comes at it that way. You come at it as an elk hunter. Not that Brian doesn't kill elk and not that you don't kill mule deer, but you guys are specialists in both of those. Yeah. And it's just fun, good conversations. And every time I listen to one of them, I learn something.
Yeah, we really have fun with it, and conversation's easy. So it's fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you learned something about predators and made your wheels turn and maybe get involved. Please get involved with your local politics, your local game agencies, and talk about predators with them.